If you think this story is about to get insane, you have no idea what's coming. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about San Quentin. Like this video if you can handle the truth. Let's go. It was 3:47 a.m. when Correctional Officer Marcus Webb noticed something was wrong. The fluorescent lights of San Quentin's East Block flickered against concrete walls painted an institutional grey that had absorbed decades of desperation. Webb had worked security at California's most dangerous prison for 18 years. He knew every routine, every protocol, every sound that belonged here. But tonight, something felt different. Something felt off. Cell Block E was silent. Too silent. The morning count came back wrong. One prisoner was missing. Not escaped. The alarms would have triggered. Not dead in his cell, he wasn't there. Marcus Webb stared at the empty bunk where inmate David Carver should have been sleeping, his stomach dropping. The cell door was locked from the outside. The window grate was secure. There was no physical way for Carver to have left. David Carver wasn't just any prisoner. He was 17 years into a life sentence for the murder of federal prosecutor James Mitchell in 1995. The case had dominated Bay Area headlines for months. Carver claimed he was innocent, that someone else had pulled the trigger, but no jury believed him. What made Carver dangerous, though, wasn't just his crime. It was who he knew on the inside. He was connected to some of the most ruthless gang leaders operating within San Quentin's walls, men with reach that extended far beyond the prison gates. Captain Elena Rodriguez arrived at the prison within an hour, her dark eyes sharp and calculating. She'd been with the California Department of Corrections for 2 decades and had learned never to assume the obvious answer. While other officers whispered about escape routes and hidden tunnels, she ordered a full lockdown and called in the FBI. "Nobody in or out until we know what happened," she commanded, her voice cutting through the nervous energy of the morning shift change. The investigation began methodically. Security footage from the previous night was pulled. The timeline was clear. Carver was accounted for during the 10 p.m. count. By 2:15 a.m., he was gone. 55 minutes of missing footage from the camera positioned outside his cell, a technical malfunction, the IT team said. Or not a malfunction. A deliberate cut. Rodriguez interviewed everyone who worked that shift. Marcus Webb was sweating through his uniform, but his story was consistent. Nobody had tampered with the cell. Nobody had been near it. Yet someone had. Then came the first real clue. In the maintenance corridor adjacent to Block E, investigators found a hand-drawn map. It was crude, sketched on prison-issue toilet paper with what looked like charcoal. The map showed the interior layout of San Quentin, with thick marks indicating pipe routes and service tunnels. Someone had been planning this. For how long, nobody knew. The bigger shock came when they discovered Carver's cellmate, Raymond Torres, had been transferred out the week before. Torres, a known associate of the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the most violent prison gangs in California. The transfer had been processed as routine, a random reassignment by the scheduling computer. Except Rodriguez didn't believe in coincidences. Not anymore. "Pull Torres's file," she told her team, "and find out who authorized his transfer." As agents dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Over the past 6 months, 3 prisoners closely connected to Carver had been transferred out of San Quentin. 3 transfers that seemed random on the surface but, when examined together, told a different story. They told the story of a plan. Rodriguez stood in the evidence room, staring at the crude map, when her phone buzzed. A text message from the tech team. "Captain, you need to see the full security footage again. We recovered the corrupted files. Something happened in Block E that night that nobody was supposed to see." She opened the attachment. Her face went pale. The footage showed something impossible. At 2:15 a.m., the cell door had opened from the inside. David Carver had walked out calmly, as if he had the key. But that wasn't the shocking part. Walking beside him, wearing a correctional officer's uniform, was someone who made Rodriguez's blood turn to ice. It was someone she thought she could trust. Someone she had worked with every single day. But when they ran a full background check on the footage and cross-referenced it with the prison roster, the unthinkable became clear. The person in that uniform didn't officially exist in the system. No records. No identification. No explanation. It was as if someone had walked into San Quentin from nowhere, freed one of the state's most dangerous prisoners, and vanished without a trace. And then came the call that changed everything. A body had been found in the San Francisco Bay, 10 miles from the prison. When the coroner pulled back the sheet, Rodriguez felt her entire investigation shift beneath her feet. It was not David Carver. It was Correctional Officer James Mitchell, the son of the federal prosecutor that Carver had supposedly murdered 27 years ago. The autopsy report came back at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Captain Rodriguez's hands trembled as she read it. James Mitchell Jr. had been dead for at least 5 days before his body washed ashore, which meant he had died the same day David Carver disappeared from his cell. The coroner found traces of prescription sedatives in his bloodstream, mixed with something else, a synthetic compound that suggested professional training. Whoever killed him knew exactly how to do it without leaving obvious physical trauma. But the most damning detail made Rodriguez close her office door and lock it. A partial fingerprint recovered from Mitchell Jr.'s wrist matched a correctional officer named Thomas Chen, who had worked security at San Quentin for 12 years. Chen had called in sick the morning of Carver's disappearance and had been unreachable ever since. The FBI launched an immediate manhunt. What they discovered in Chen's apartment sent shockwaves through the entire investigation. Photographs covered his wall, not the wall of a disturbed man, but the documentation of someone obsessed. Pictures of David Carver dating back years. Court documents from Carver's trial. Newspaper clippings about the murder of federal prosecutor James Mitchell Sr. and at the center of it all, dozens of photos of James Mitchell Jr., taken over months, tracking his movements, his schedule, his routines. But beneath all of this were letters. Handwritten letters between Chen and someone else. Letters that revealed a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Rodriguez sat in the FBI field office with Special Agent Derek Walsh, reading passages aloud, each word making the case more twisted. "My father was innocent," one letter read. The prosecutor didn't care about truth. He cared about closing a case. David Carver took the fall for something he didn't do. For something that they did. And they've been protecting each other ever since. Agent Walsh leaned forward. If this is real, if Carver is innocent, then the original murder of the prosecutor in 1995 wasn't what anyone thought it was. "It's worse than that," Rodriguez said quietly, her eyes locked on another passage. "This letter says James Mitchell Jr. was part of it. The cover-up. The conspiracy. They were silencing him." Within hours, the FBI exhumed the original case file from 1995. The murder of federal prosecutor James Mitchell had been handled as an organized crime execution. Quick, professional, no witnesses. The case had gone cold, but not before David Carver, a small-time drug dealer with gang connections, had been arrested with a gun registered to the murder scene. Carver claimed he'd been framed. No one believed him. But now, as investigators combed through old evidence with fresh eyes, inconsistencies emerged like cracks in a facade. The gun found in Carver's apartment didn't match the ballistics from the actual murder. A second gun had been used, a detail buried in the original file by Prosecutor Mitchell Sr., who led the case personally. Rodriguez made a call that changed everything. She reached out to Dr. Sarah Chen, Thomas Chen's sister, a criminal psychologist who had distanced herself from her brother years ago. What Sarah revealed made the captain's jaw clench. "Tommy told me, years ago, that our father had worked with James Mitchell Sr., Sarah said, her voice tight with old pain. "He said they'd been involved in something in the late 80s, before Mitchell became a prosecutor. Something that left bodies. When Mitchell Sr. became a prosecutor, he used his position to cover it all up. And when it looked like the truth might come out, he framed David Carver." "Where is your brother now?" Rodriguez demanded. "I don't know. But I know this. Tommy would never hurt anyone unless he thought he was stopping something worse. If he killed James Mitchell Jr., he believed he had a reason." The investigation pivoted overnight. Federal agents descended on the office of James Mitchell Sr., now retired and living in Marin County. When they arrived, they found his home immaculate. His study was locked, and on his desk, a single envelope addressed to Captain Rodriguez. Inside was a recording, an audio file dated 3 weeks before Carver's escape. It was a phone conversation between James Mitchell Sr. and his son, James Jr. "We can't let this unravel," the father's voice said, cold and calculated. "If Carver goes free and the truth comes out about what happened in 1989, we're finished. Both of us. You need to make sure Chen doesn't talk." "Dad, this is insane. We've already destroyed enough lives. Then consider this the last one. Or we both go down together." Rodriguez sat in stunned silence. James Mitchell Sr. had essentially confessed to orchestrating his own son's murder. A confession he'd left for the authorities to find, almost as if he wanted the world to know the truth before he faced judgment. But when agents drove to his house to bring him in for questioning, they found the front door unlocked and the house empty. On the kitchen table lay a single note in his handwriting: "The truth has a price. Pay it." And in the garage, they discovered a car running with the engine still warm. James Mitchell Sr. had vanished. The manhunt for 2 fugitives was now underway: David Carver, possibly innocent and freed by a conspiracy, and James Mitchell Sr., the architect of a decades-long cover-up. But the strangest part was yet to come. When Rodriguez reviewed the security footage again, frame by frame, looking for any glimpse of the mysterious officer who had helped Carver escape, she saw something that made her blood freeze. The person in the uniform wasn't just familiar. It was someone she'd seen before, someone from the original 1995 case file. Someone who was supposed to be dead. And he was walking directly toward the investigative unit's office. Right now. Captain Elena Rodriguez's hand moved to her service weapon as the figure walked through the hallway toward her office. But she didn't draw it. Because as the person stepped into the light, she recognized him. Not from the security footage. Not from the case files. She recognized him because she'd worked with him for 5 years before his official death in a prison riot in 2003. Officer David Patterson. Except David Patterson was supposed to be dead. His body had been identified through dental records after a violent uprising in the D block of San Quentin left 3 guards dead. The funeral had been attended by the entire California Department of Corrections. His name was engraved on the memorial wall inside the prison. "Captain," Patterson said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of secrets. "I need you to understand something before the FBI arrives. I need you to know why this had to happen." Rodriguez kept her hand steady. "Sit down, Patterson, and start talking." What Patterson revealed changed everything. In 1989, when James Mitchell Sr. was not yet a prosecutor but a federal agent investigating organized crime, he and 3 others had executed a man named Marcus Reyes. Not through legal channels. Not with a warrant. An execution. Reyes was a cartel accountant who had threatened to expose corruption at the FBI, corruption that Mitchell and his partners had orchestrated to become wealthy off seized assets. David Patterson had been there. He was a junior agent back then, and he'd watched it happen. For years, he said nothing. He took the money they offered him. He stayed silent. But his conscience never allowed him to sleep. When he transferred to the California Department of Corrections in 1998, he began researching the case that had been buried. And that's when he discovered that David Carver, a man with zero connection to the Reyes murder, had been framed to take the fall, framed by the prosecutor himself to bury the original crime. "I couldn't prove it," Patterson said, his voice breaking. "But I could set him free." "So you killed James Mitchell Jr.?" Rodriguez asked, though she already knew the answer. He was part of it. His father told him everything, made him complicit. He was helping to keep Carver imprisoned. He was about to go after Thomas Chen, go after anyone who might uncover the truth. "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Rodriguez said coldly. Patterson's expression hardened. "Do they? Tell me, Captain, what choice did David Carver have when a federal prosecutor framed him for murder? What choice did the Reyes family have when the government murdered their son?" Before Rodriguez could respond, the office door burst open. FBI agents poured in, weapons drawn. But Patterson didn't resist. He simply held up his hands, and as they advanced, he smiled. "You're going to want to check the financial records from 1989, he said calmly. "Follow the money. Mitchell Sr. has accounts under 17 different names. He stole over $4 million that year alone. And he's going to try to disappear with all of it." The agents had already found the accounts. The FBI was tracking Mitchell SRS movements as they spoke. What they discovered made headlines for months. James Mitchell Sr. had fled to a private airfield outside Sacramento, trying to catch a flight to Mexico. Federal agents intercepted him at the gate. When they arrested him, they found him carrying a briefcase containing nearly $2 million in cash and documents detailing 3 unsolved murders from 1989, all orchestrated to cover up his theft from federal seized asset accounts. David Carver was released from San Quentin with a full exoneration. The state issued an apology and a settlement, though no amount of money could restore the 27 years he'd lost. Thomas Chen was found 6 months later in Portland, living under an assumed name. He agreed to testify against James Mitchell Sr. in exchange for immunity for his role in James Mitchell Jr.'s death. The court accepted the deal. In their judgment, they ruled that Chen had acted under the psychological manipulation of a systemic cover-up, and that his crimes, while serious, paled against the decades of injustice perpetrated by the institution itself. David Patterson received a sentence of 15 years to life for his role in the murder. He accepted it without appeal. But the story didn't end with convictions and closure. 3 months after Patterson's sentencing, while he sat in a federal prison in Colorado, awaiting transport to San Quentin, a corrections officer discovered him dead in his cell. The official report called it suicide. A note was found written in Patterson's hand. "The truth required a price. I've paid mine." Rodriguez never believed the official cause of death. Because 6 weeks later, a package arrived at her home. Inside were photographs of corrections officers meeting with lawyers connected to James Mitchell Sr., photographs of financial transfers. Photographs that suggested Mitchell Sr. had orchestrated Patterson's death from behind bars, using connections he'd built over decades in the prison system. She contacted the FBI immediately, but by the time federal agents launched a new investigation, the evidence had been destroyed. The officers in the photographs had fled. Mitchell Sr., despite his sentence, was serving his time in a privately managed facility where oversight was minimal and corruption was profitable. As Rodriguez sat in her home that night, reviewing the photographs one final time, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number read simply, "Some conspiracies never end. Some prisons are just bigger than others." She never learned who sent it. And she never stopped investigating. Because David Carver, the man who had finally been freed after 27 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit, had also disappeared. Not captured by authorities. Not dead. Simply gone. And according to the final intelligence Rodriguez uncovered before she was quietly transferred to a desk job far away from San Quentin, David Carver had been seen in 3 different countries within months of his release, always accompanied by the same person. A person whose face appeared in security footage from the original prison. A person who looked remarkably similar to David Patterson. A person everyone believed was dead.